Do you believe in forgiving or forgetting?
You ever sit in a room full of people who claim to love you and feel like a stranger among them? Like you're on the outside of some invisible joke everyone else isn't on? That's what my entire childhood felt like, one long, awkward dinner where everyone passed the mashed potatoes to my brother first, even when they were sitting right in front of me. My mother, Helen Matthews, always said she didn't play favorites, but if that were true, then the sky's not blue and pigs fly coach to Miami. She didn't play favorites, she lived them. She breathed them. She built an entire identity around praising my brother, Adam, and sculpting him into this perfect, polished golden boy, while I was just the girl who got good grades and didn't make waves. The backup child. The filler. Adam was born 3 years before me, and I swear to you, my mother's face changed when she looked at him. She'd tilt her head, smile this little proud smile like a teacher whose student just got into Harvard. When he walked into a room, she stood taller, laughed louder, lit up like someone had just turned the sun back on. When I walked in, she barely glanced up from whatever magazine she was pretending to read. My earliest memory of her affection wasn't even for me, it was for him. I must have been 4, maybe 5, and Adam had just won some elementary school award for Most Improved Reading. My mother baked a cake, called my grandparents, took pictures like he'd cured cancer. That same year, I got accepted into a gifted arts program. You know what she said? "That's nice, Claire, but don't let it distract you from real subjects. You think it's small stuff, right? Little things kids forget. But little things, stacked year after year, become bones in your back. They shift your posture. They teach you how to move quieter, how to shrink your joy just enough so it doesn't seem like you're trying to compete. Because you'll never win. Not against Adam. Not in her eyes." I remember this one time, I was maybe 16, Adam had borrowed our dad's car to take some girl to a party. He got drunk. She crashed it. No one got hurt, thank God, but the front end looked like it had gone 3 rounds with a freight train. I came home to see police lights dancing off the living room walls. Mom was crying. Adam was fake crying. I stood there frozen. She turned to me, not him, and said, "Claire, take the blame. Say it was you. He'll get kicked off the varsity team if they find out." I didn't even have a license yet. I did it. I lied to the cops. Said I snuck the keys, panicked, didn't mean to, that I'd pay for the damage when I got a job. They believed me. Because I looked responsible. Because girls like me were born to carry guilt. Adam kept playing football. Got his varsity jacket. Got into college. And got a brand new car 6 months later. Meanwhile, I picked up shifts at the diner down the road to help cover the insurance premium. She never paid me back. She never even thanked me. She just told me not to bring it up again, said it was water under the bridge. But it wasn't water. It was acid. And it burned a hole in everything that came after. Fast forward a few decades and not much had changed, except now Adam was in finance, whatever the hell that means, and lived in one of those shiny suburbs with 3-car garages and women who wear yoga pants as a full-time uniform. My mother bragged about him like he was the second coming of Kennedy. "Did you know Adam just closed on a 4-bedroom colonial?" she'd say. Or, "Adam's taking me to Aruba next spring," as if the rest of us were just keeping her schedule warm between flights. Me? I worked my ass off at a nonprofit for foster kids, real work that meant something, but she never brought that up to her church friends. Too messy. Not shiny enough. Claire does something with troubled youth. That's how she described it once. And through all this, I never said much. I kept the peace. I showed up at holidays. I smiled for the Christmas card pictures. I brought Jenna, my daughter, my reason for staying grounded, and watched her start to notice, too. How Grandma always gave Adam's kids bigger gifts. How she lit up when they said thank you, but barely acknowledged when Jenna got straight A's. I saw the confusion in Jenna's eyes turn to resentment. And that's when I knew I had to stop pretending. Because here's the truth, eventually, pretending starts to look like permission. A few weeks ago, I got a birthday card in the mail from Helen. Just a generic, "Happy Birthday, Claire," in gold cursive on the front. Inside was a single $100 bill and nothing else. No note. No message. Just that lonely bill, Like a tip you leave a waitress after you made her fetch your ranch dressing 5 times and never said thank you. I laughed. I mean, really laughed. Like one of those sharp, bitter laughs that sounds like it might become a sob if you let it go too long. And then something else slipped out of the envelope. A smaller envelope, sealed in red wax, classy, right? With Adam's name on it in her handwriting. I turned it over. No stamp. No address. This wasn't mailed. This was meant to be hand-delivered. A private message for the golden boy. I knew I shouldn't open it. Knew it was a line I hadn't crossed before. But in that moment, standing there in my kitchen with that $100 insult burning a hole in my palm, I thought, why not? She never respected boundaries. Why should I? So I opened it. And that's where everything started to unravel. Because the letter inside wasn't just praise, it was a confession. Not in so many words, but in tone, in implications, in that slippery, sharp way narcissists tell on themselves without realizing it. The last line read, "You've always known the truth about Claire. And someday, the world will too." I read it once. Then again. Then again. My hands were shaking. Because I didn't know what she meant. Or maybe I did. And I didn't want to admit it. That letter wasn't for Adam. It was for me. She wanted me to find it. And right then, I realized something. She didn't just prefer Adam. She resented me. But she was about to find out that quiet daughters don't stay quiet forever. There's a strange kind of stillness that settles over you when you read something that shifts your entire understanding of the people who raised you, something that doesn't scream betrayal outright, but whispers it through implication, through tone, through the carefully chosen words that sit too comfortably on the page, because they were never meant for you to see them. I stood in my kitchen, the silence wrapping around me so tightly it felt like a second skin, holding that letter in my hand, reading the last line over and over as if maybe, on the 5th or 6th pass, it would somehow change. You've always known the truth about Claire. And someday, the world will too. It was written in her usual neat script, the kind of handwriting that made even cruel things look elegant, the same handwriting she used in birthday cards that always sounded like obligation more than affection, and suddenly, I was no longer a woman in her mid-40s holding a letter. I was a little girl again, wondering what I had done wrong. I didn't tell anyone about the letter that day. I folded it neatly, slipped it back into the envelope addressed to Adam, and put it in the drawer next to the junk mail and expired coupons, like it was just another useless thing I didn't know what to do with. But the words stayed with me, replaying in my mind at odd hours, in the shower, during a Zoom meeting, while I was making dinner for Jenna, until it started to feel like I had swallowed a stone, and it was sinking deeper with every breath I took. That sentence wasn't just cryptic, it was calculated. My mother wasn't dumb, she never was. Every word she spoke or wrote was part of a larger play, a manipulation disguised as a compliment or a subtle jab cloaked in concern. And that line about the truth wasn't meant for Adam. It was bait. And I had taken it. For the next few days, I found myself drifting through old memories like a sleepwalker, tracing back every interaction, every moment where something had felt off, but I'd ignored it because that's what daughters are taught to do. Dismiss their instincts in the name of keeping peace. I remembered being 15 and overhearing Helen on the phone with her sister, saying, "Claire's just different. Not like Adam. He's easy. She's always questioning everything." I remembered the time she told me not to wear red to a cousin's wedding because it would draw attention and wasn't appropriate, only to show up herself in a fire engine red blazer. I remembered how she once told Jenna, when she was only 10, that being opinionated isn't the same as being smart. And I remembered how that night, Jenna had cried into her pillow, thinking she'd disappointed her grandmother just by being herself. That Friday, I was halfway through folding laundry, shirts Jenna hadn't outgrown yet, and a few towels that were older than my marriage, when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a text from Jenna. "Grandma wants us to come to her big birthday party." Like, big. You in? There was no follow-up, no emoji, just those few words, but the weight of them landed on me like a sack of bricks. I didn't respond right away. I sat there, staring at the message, trying to decide if I was strong enough to walk into a room where every smile was a performance and every toast was a thinly veiled attack, and more importantly, if I wanted to let Jenna watch it happen in real time. But that's the thing about mothers like mine, they don't stop at you. They keep going, winding their claws around the next generation, and the next, until someone finally cuts them loose. I wasn't about to let my daughter become another branch on that twisted tree. I waited until Jenna got home from school. She dropped her backpack by the door, kicked off her sneakers, and flopped on the couch in that teenage sprawl that somehow takes up 3 cushions. I sat across from her, the envelope in my hands. I didn't hand it to her, I just held it, like a prop in a play I wasn't sure I was ready to perform. She looked at me, eyes narrowing, because she could always tell when I was gearing up for something serious. "She sent me a letter," I said. "Grandma?" I nodded. "To Adam." I wasn't supposed to see it, but it kind of fell out. Jenna tilted her head, curious but cautious. "What did it say?" I debated whether to repeat the line, whether it was better to shield her or show her the truth, but then I thought about how many years I had wasted hoping for crumbs of affection that never came, how many lies I swallowed just to keep peace, and I realized, if I wanted to break the cycle, I had to tell her everything. So I told her. I watched her expression shift from surprise to confusion, then to anger, the kind of anger that only comes from recognizing something you've suspected all along. She didn't say much. She just stood up, walked to the drawer, pulled the letter out, and read it for herself. When she finished, she handed it back to me. "Well," she said, "guess we're going to that party." Her words shouldn't have surprised me, but they did, because there was no hesitation, no fear. Just quiet resolve. The kind I had never seen in myself at that age. The kind I had never been allowed to grow. We spent the next few days in silence that wasn't empty, but full of thought, of planning, of the kind of preparation you don't put into words because the moment you do, it becomes too real. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do at that party, only that I would no longer let myself be the quiet background character in a story my mother insisted on telling her way. She wanted the world to know some twisted truth about me? Fine. But she'd hear mine first. And in that silence, in the space between what she wrote and what she never said, I found the beginning of my voice again. I had no idea just how loud it would get. There's a particular type of resolve that doesn't roar or announce itself with fanfare, it creeps in slowly, like light seeping through the edges of heavy curtains after a long night, and by the time you notice it, it's already there, warming everything it touches, changing the way you see the walls around you. That's what began to grow inside me in the days leading up to my mother's 75th birthday party. Not rage, not even bitterness anymore, but something colder, heavier, and far more dangerous than either, clarity. Because once the veil of denial slips, and once you stop hoping someone will ever become the parent you needed them to be, what's left is not grief, it's freedom. And freedom, in the right hands, can be a weapon sharper than any cruel word or backhanded compliment. After Jenna and I had read the letter and sat with its implications, what it meant about my mother's view of me, about Adam, about the years I had spent trying to prove my worth in a rigged game, I realized I couldn't go to that party simply to endure it the way I had every other forced gathering in the past. I couldn't show up, sip cheap champagne, smile politely at people who didn't know the half of it, and clap along while Helen spun another golden fairy tale about Adam's latest promotion or vacation home. No, this time had to be different. This time, if I was going to walk into the den of wolves, I was going to do it wearing teeth of my own. I started by going through the old boxes I kept in the attic, the ones I hadn't touched since I moved into this house 7 years ago, after the divorce, after the wreckage of my so-called marriage left me with a daughter, a mortgage, and not much else to speak of. Most of the boxes were filled with the kind of clutter no one ever wants to deal with, school projects from Jenna's elementary years, old journals I barely remembered writing, tax returns that probably didn't need to be saved anymore. But near the bottom of the final box, under a stack of mismatched photo albums, I found something that stopped me cold, an old, clunky flash drive labeled in my handwriting, Mom voicemails. I'd completely forgotten I had ever made a backup of them, but there it was, This little black device holding years of messages I had saved out of some foolish, wounded sense of wanting to hold on to her voice, as though one day I might need to hear it and be comforted by it. That comfort never came. I plugged it into my laptop, and one by one I listened to them, each one a time-stamped memory that told its own version of the truth. One in particular stood out, left on the day my divorce was finalized. Helen had called me, not to offer support, not to ask how I was holding up, but to say, in that clipped, rehearsed tone of hers, "Claire, I hope this teaches you something. Mark was never the problem. You should have tried harder." I remembered exactly where I had been when I first heard that message, sitting on the bathroom floor with a towel wrapped around my wet hair, Jenna asleep in the next room, and the weight of that sentence hitting me harder than the divorce papers themselves. But this time, hearing it again years later, I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I saved it. I copied it onto a new file. And I started building a folder. Over the next 2 days, I combed through photo albums, emails, old text chains, anything that showed the truth behind the family mythology my mother had worked so tirelessly to curate. There were photos from birthdays where Adam got elaborate cakes and I got store-bought cupcakes with my name misspelled. There were messages she sent praising Adam for always being there for her, even during years he didn't bother calling her on holidays, while I was the one driving her to doctor's appointments and picking up her groceries when she got the flu. There was even an old email thread between her and my aunt where she said, without shame, "Claire's always been difficult. Too emotional. Not like Adam. He's got discipline." I compiled it all, every note, every message, every picture, into a single, cohesive presentation. But I didn't stop there. The party was going to be held at a rented banquet hall inside one of those country clubs where everything smells faintly of furniture polish and upper-middle-class resentment, the kind of place where people wear pearls to brunch and whisper loudly about politics. I called the venue under the pretense of confirming our RSVP and found out they were renting out the projector system for family speeches and videos, probably something Adam had arranged to show a tribute to Helen, complete with soft piano music and slow fades. That was fine. I had no intention of stopping him. But after his video ended, mine would begin. All I had to do was show up a little early and hand a flash drive to the tech guy with a smile. Jenna, to her credit, didn't ask questions when I told her we were going a little early and that I needed her to help me carry something in. She had seen enough by now, heard enough, read enough, to trust that whatever I was planning wasn't coming from spite, but from the kind of long-overdue justice that every daughter who's ever been treated like a backup plan dreams of delivering. And while I didn't fill her in on every detail, I did show her the voicemail. Her expression didn't change much, but she said she won't even see it coming, and there was something about the way she said it, so calm, so certain, that made me feel stronger. The night before the party, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous, but because I could feel something shifting in the air, like a tide turning, like the moment before a storm finally breaks open after days of oppressive stillness. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into one of my mother's carefully orchestrated events like a bystander or a reluctant participant. I was walking in with purpose. And not just for me, but for every version of myself she'd tried to silence over the years, for every time she dismissed my voice or diminished my accomplishments or planted seeds of doubt in the garden of my identity. I wore red. Not just any red, her red. The exact shade she had once worn to a wedding and told me I couldn't wear because it was too loud, too flashy, not what a good girl wears. It fit me perfectly. And when I stepped into that ballroom, heels clicking against the tile, heads turned not out of surprise, but out of recognition. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the storm. There's a peculiar kind of quiet that descends on a room full of people just before a storm breaks, not the kind born of silence, but the kind saturated with expectation, charged with unsaid things, buzzing beneath every glance and every polite laugh. As though everyone can sense something approaching, but no one knows whether to welcome it or run from it. That's the kind of quiet that settled into the corners of the country club ballroom the moment I stepped through the doors, with Jenna at my side, dressed in her grandmother's idea of appropriate formal wear. and wearing an expression that could have cracked glass if anyone had dared look at her the wrong way. I could feel the eyes on me almost instantly, some curious, some confused, and a few, those who really knew Helen, just slightly amused, as if they were wondering whether I'd come to make trouble or simply to bear witness to another episode of the Helen and Adam show. The room had been decorated with an attention to detail that was both impressive and exhausting. White linens pressed so tightly you could bounce a coin off them, floral centerpieces that screamed expensive and unnecessary. A table of framed photographs chronicling Helen's journey from childhood to retirement, carefully curated to feature Adam in nearly every shot and me in as few as possible. It wasn't subtle. But then again, it never had been. I didn't say much as we made our way to our assigned seats, 4 rows from the front, on the opposite end from Adam's family, almost as if someone had drawn a line down the room and made sure to keep us on the less photogenic side of it. Adam was already there, of course, perfectly tailored in some blue-gray designer suit, holding court with a cluster of mutual acquaintances and distant cousins who laughed a little too hard at everything he said. He glanced up as I walked past, and our eyes met for just a second, long enough for something unspoken to pass between us, something sharp-edged and old and never really dealt with. He didn't smile. Neither did I. The night unfolded as these things always do, small talk over dry chicken, over sugared wine, laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes, and a steady stream of shallow conversations about real estate, travel, and which private schools had the best fencing programs. I played along. I nodded, sipped my wine, and smiled at the appropriate moments, all while the flash drive in my purse felt like a weight tethering me to the floor, reminding me with every breath that this time was different, that I hadn't come here to swallow the same old performance in silence. When dessert was served, some sort of raspberry chocolate creation too bitter to be pleasant, one of Helen's friends, Linda, tapped her glass with a spoon and rose unsteadily to announce the beginning of the speeches. Her voice, high and artificial, sliced through the chatter like a blade dipped in sugar. "We are here tonight to celebrate 75 wonderful years of Helen Matthews," she declared, gesturing dramatically toward the head table, where my mother sat like a queen overseeing her court, resplendent in a pale gold jacket that glittered just enough to demand attention without begging for it. She smiled, graciously, as if the world owed her this moment. Adam was first, of course. He stood, cleared his throat, and launched into a speech so polished it could have been pulled straight from a PR manual, stories of childhood antics, praise for her unmatched grace and wisdom, memories of her comforting presence during his exams, his job interviews, his big life moments. Not once did he mention her cruelty, her manipulation, or the quiet emotional currency she had spent so freely at our expense. The crowd laughed. They applauded. Someone even wiped away a tear. Then it was Helen's turn. She stood slowly, with the theatrics of someone used to admiration, lifted her glass and smiled grinned into the microphone, the kind of grin that said she had waited all night for this exact moment. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "It means the world to have so many friends and family gathered to celebrate the years behind me, and, I hope, the ones still ahead." People murmured approvingly. "And of course," she continued, pausing for effect, "I want to acknowledge my 2 children, Adam, who has always made me proud, and Claire, who, well, Claire has her own unique journey." There was a flicker of discomfort in the room. Just a flicker. She didn't stop. "I've always believed in rewarding those who earn their place in your heart and in your life," she said, her smile sharpening. "One of my children will be rewarded. The other knows why they won't." That silence, the one pregnant with implication and anticipation, crashed down like a wave, smothering the laughter, flattening every polite mask in the room. I felt Jenna's hand tighten around mine under the table. I looked at my mother, and I saw no shame, no regret, only satisfaction. She meant every word. She wanted it to sting. So I stood. I didn't wait. I didn't smile. I didn't ask for permission. I raised my glass, held it high, and with a voice that didn't shake, I said, "Good thing I already have more than you left me." Gasps rippled through the room like wind through dry leaves. A few people laughed nervously, unsure whether it was a joke. But I wasn't done. I reached into my purse, pulled out the flash drive, and walked calmly to the AV table at the side of the room. The technician, a kid no older than 20, clearly hired last minute, looked confused when I handed it to him. "Just press play," I said. "When the screen comes on." He hesitated but nodded. I walked back to my seat and folded my hands. The lights dimmed. The screen lit up. At first, it was a photo, a snapshot of Helen at the beach, holding Adam, maybe 5 years old, beaming as if the sun had landed in her arms. Then another, Adam in his cap and gown. Adam at his engagement party. Adam on vacation. All from her collection, all curated to show the child she valued. Then, slowly, the images shifted me, in the background of every family photo. Me, off-center, cropped out, blurred. Me at my graduation, no mother present. Me holding Jenna at the hospital, no visitor. Then, the voicemail played. Helen's voice, cold and sharp, filled the room. "I hope this teaches you something. Mark was never the problem. You should have tried harder." Another voicemail followed. "You're always so dramatic, Claire. No one wants to be around someone who complains all the time." And then, the final blow, the letter. The words from her own hand, read aloud in Jenna's voice, strong and steady. "You've always known the truth about Claire. And someday, the world will too." When the screen went black, the room stayed silent for a beat too long. Then came the murmurs. The questions. The looks. I turned back to my mother, who was still standing, but no longer smiling. She looked smaller. Older. Almost confused. But I didn't gloat. I simply said, loud enough for the room to hear, "Now the world knows." And then I sat down. Jenna looked at me, her eyes wide, proud, and just a little stunned. We didn't need to say anything else. But I could feel the shift. And I knew we had finally cracked the illusion. The only question left was what would come pouring out from behind it. There's a strange kind of silence that follows a public reckoning, a hollow yet oddly weighted quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from the space that's suddenly made when something heavy, something long denied and deeply rooted, finally collapses under the weight of truth. And in the wake of that collapse, you're left standing in the ruins wondering not whether it was necessary, because you've already made peace with that, but whether the damage you've done, though justified, will ever stop, echoing through the lives of everyone who witnessed it. That silence is not gentle. It hums beneath your skin, it settles behind your ribs, and it asks questions you thought you already answered, questions like, did I say too much? Did I do it for justice or for revenge? Did it change anything, or did it just prove to everyone what they already suspected but were too polite or too cowardly to say out loud? The morning after the party, I woke up in a house that was still, in every sense of the word. Jenna had already left for her part-time shift at the bookstore, and the light through the curtains was soft, warm, unassuming, as if the sun had decided to play nice with me for once. But even the sunlight felt like an intruder, as though the world didn't quite know how to treat me now, me, the daughter who stood up and tore down the family myth in front of a room full of people who came expecting finger foods and polite applause, and instead got a front-row seat to generational dysfunction unraveling like ribbon on a gift no one wanted to open. The messages started coming in around 10. Some were predictable. A few passive-aggressive texts from distant relatives warning me I should have handled things privately, that I had embarrassed my mother, that I had burned bridges that didn't need to be burned. But others, quiet, cautious, unexpected, carried something else entirely. One from my cousin Lydia, who I hadn't spoken to in years, simply said, "Thank you. I saw what she did to my mom too." No one ever said anything. Another came from one of Helen's friends, Linda, surprisingly, who wrote, "She's hurt a lot more people than you know. Don't let anyone make you feel wrong for telling the truth." It wasn't validation, not exactly, but it was something close. Something I had never been given freely by that side of the family. Something that made me sit with my coffee just a little longer that morning, letting the bitterness sink in on my tongue until I could taste the difference between vengeance and clarity. What I didn't expect, though, was the letter. It arrived 4 days later, hand-delivered in an envelope with no return address, thick cream paper, and that same familiar, controlled script that I had come to associate with reprimands dressed up as concern. Inside was a single sheet, no greeting, no pleasantries, just 3 sentences. You've made your choice. The will has been updated. I hope your daughter learns from your mistakes. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I knew that voice. I had heard it for over 40 years, in whispered criticisms, in cold silences, in every dismissal that told me I was too much and never enough all at once. I read it twice. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger. What I felt, if I'm being honest, was relief, because for the first time in my life, Helen had drawn a clear line in the sand, one I no longer had to pretend didn't exist. The performance was over. The game was finished. There would be no last-minute reconciliation, no dramatic scene of forgiveness in a hospital room, no will-reading twist where she meant well all along. She had cut me out, officially, and in doing so, she had finally freed me from the hope that she would ever be anything different than who she was. I didn't tell Jenna about the letter right away. I didn't want to sour the strange lightness we'd found in the days after the party, those small moments of joy that came from shared silence, from the way she'd glance at me across the dinner table with something like pride, from how she started calling out her friends' moms when they made controlling comments, saying things like, "My mom would never say that," with this fierce, quiet certainty that made me believe, maybe for the first time, that I'd broken the pattern before it could take root in her. And that, more than anything, felt like the real inheritance, something I hadn't been given, but had carved out of stone with my own hands. Eventually, though, I showed her the letter. She read it in silence, her jaw tightening just slightly, and then she handed it back to me and said, "We don't need her money. She's the one who lost something." I believed her. A few weeks later, word got around, because in families like mine, news travels faster than guilt, that Helen had finalized the new will. Adam got everything. The house, the savings, the boxes of heirlooms she guarded like they were crown jewels. He didn't call me. He didn't gloat. I imagine part of him felt vindicated, justified, like he had finally been handed the trophy he'd always assumed was his by birthright. But what I also know, with a certainty that doesn't need evidence to stand, is that he felt something else too, something heavier, something harder to sit with, because deep down, Adam had always needed me in that role, the scapegoat, the one who made his victories shine brighter by comparison. And now that I had stepped out of the shadows, he was alone in the spotlight, exposed and, in some ways, far more vulnerable than I had ever been. As for my mother, I didn't hear from her again. Not directly. But I heard stories, how she told her bridge club I had acted out due to unresolved mental health issues, how she insisted I was always jealous of Adam, how she rewrote the narrative with such conviction that I almost admired the commitment. But none of it stuck the way it used to. Because now, when people looked at me, they saw something different. Not a bitter daughter, not a dramatic woman who couldn't let the past go, but someone who, for better or worse, had drawn a line and refused to step back over it. And still, even after all that, there are nights when I lie awake and wonder if I went too far, if the presentation, the voicemail, the pointed words were too sharp, too public, too final. But then I remember the look in Jenna's eyes when she watched the truth unfold, the way she gripped my hand and didn't let go, the way she walked beside me out of that ballroom with her head held high, and I know that whatever price I paid, it bought her something I never had. The right to take up space in her own life without apologizing for it. Some people inherit houses, stocks, jewelry, a box of fine china that no one ever actually uses. Me? I inherited silence. And for a long time, I let that silence dictate every room I walked into, every decision I made, every apology I gave before anyone asked for one. But now, finally, that silence belongs to me. I decide what to do with it. I decide when to break it. Maybe that's all the closure I'll ever get. Or maybe it's just the beginning. Either way, I'm not waiting for her approval anymore.